All good. Good afternoon to you all. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and I realize this is the last segment, so you're probably going to struggle to keep awake. I hope that I will prevent you from falling asleep, but I can't guarantee anything, okay? So let me introduce myself first of all. So my name is Adam Preis, and I've actually, thanks to Rick and Andrew, this is a great opportunity for me because this is now the third time I'm presenting in the banking scene. So second time in Amsterdam, actually fourth, because I did Brussels twice, so fourth time. So I love coming to Brussels to keep going. Hey, you're making all the opportunities available. Apart from the timing, like we'll talk about that afterwards, right? It's great to be here with you, and the topics that we've had this morning and particularly this afternoon have been absolutely fascinating. And so I'm Adam Preis. I work for Ping Identity. I've been on Ping Identity for 5 years. I've been in the identity space for, longer than I care to count, 8+ years, if not more, working across multiple organizational boundaries. And, you know, I got to tell you, I'll be honest with you, I'm not too excited about my title, okay? I'm not too excited. And the reason why I'm not too excited is because we've been talking about identity modernization in banking for years now. So you're probably thinking, gosh, it's going to be boring, isn't it, right? It's going to regurgitate the same old stuff. No, that's incorrect. The actual fact is that, you know, Peter gave us a beautiful frame. The agentic AI revolution that's taking place is a beautiful frame for how identity modernization is going to take a huge leap and a huge different paradigm change. So today I want to talk to you about that. Before I do, I'll say it's quite an exciting day for us because just under an hour ago, Ping Identity released its Identity for AI capability, which is our agentic AI capability for identity. So it's beautiful timing. So let's get on with it then. So the 3 things I want to kind of cover today, I want to go back to the basics, right? I mean, look, I work for a company that's private equity owned, things move very quickly, and we're always asking ourselves how and when. And I like to ask the why questions. So I'm just going to go back a little step here. I'm going to just cover this kind of first topic there around what is identity and access management, or IAM, anyway, right? Let's just go back to the basics. I then will kind of go into looking at how identity's evolved in the banking space over the past few years, and then we'll get on to the agentic AI. So don't worry, we'll get there eventually. So first of all, to get you kind of up and awake, I have a question for you. So if you get your phones out, I wanted to kind of measure your sentiment on what identity, digital identity means to you. Don't overthink it, right? Don't have to wear your enterprise hat on or your consumer hat on, just whatever comes to mind. Words, phrases, as long as not too obscene or you're calling me names, I don't mind, right? I'm just very curious to see what identity means to you, because that's a very useful frame for what we'll discuss. Secure convenience factor. Wow, okay. I wish access was convenient. Trust, yes, okay, good. Yeah, that covers part of my presentation. That's brilliant. Digital access, personalization. We talked a lot about personalization earlier on this afternoon in our earlier sessions. What does that mean? Pain, suffering, being locked out, I take it. Secure convenience factor, first step, effortless, convenience. Okay, this is great. Okay, thank you so much for contributing. Convenience, okay, that's really interesting. Convenience, trust, effortless. It keeps going. There's still more. We've got an active audience. Rick, you've built an active community here. It's great. It's really interesting. Somebody said effortless. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say access is effortless, particularly in banking, right? If you have no friction, you really have to ask yourself a question. Is my bank doing it the right way? Okay, anyway, thank you so much, guys. I appreciate that. So let's move on to the first section, okay? So let's ask ourselves the question, what is identity and access management anyway? And I kind of boiled it down to 3 things, rolled up at a high helicopter level. Fundamentally, it's about customer experience on a consumer side, right? And we in the banking know that we need to not just log in and authenticate our users, but we also have to be able to carry out KYC, AML checks. We have to manage risks. We have to secure accounts. We have to secure access. But actually, identity is much more than that, right? If you ask the average person on the street, what is identity? They'll say, it's about logging in, isn't it? And it is, don't get me wrong, but there's much more to this. It's fundamentally about turning unknown customers into loyal customers. So the moment somebody hits your website or has a conversation in branch or how calls your call center or increasingly interacts with your agents? Can we understand who that customer is? Can we bring them into the journey? And can we create value out of that? Very interestingly as well enough, particularly I'm from the UK, as you might guess from my accent, it's also about managing profiles. So there's a huge kind of drive, particularly in retail banking now, in the UK and other parts of Europe, to create delegated junior accounts. We as parents have control of the accounts that we're partly delegating to our hopefully responsible young children within guardrails, within limits, right? Whole kind of thing around authorization. And we've obviously, you know, through our years in open banking and payments rail innovation, now PSD3 just around the corner, we know it's also about strong customer authentication, stepping up, all those kinds of things, right? But it's about so much more than that as well. Ultimately as well, identity is also about the identity lifecycle. It's not just one event. There are a series of events that work across the identity lifecycle that are really important to manage and control, particularly as we're looking at multiple identities. And I'll come on to that in a minute. We're not just looking at consumer identities, we're looking at workforce, we're looking at third-party identities, and increasingly, non-human identities. Yes, agentic AI, right? So there needs to be a life cycle to manage that, to protect those identities. Actually, you'll see if you look at most of the analyst reports from the likes of Gartner and Forrester, they talk increasingly about identity security. Like that's a thing now. How do you secure those identities across all environments, all deployment settings? So we need to protect those identities. We need to identify who those users are. We need to be able to manage those and then enable access at the right time. Back in the old days, this is all about, hey, you know, particularly on the workforce side, I've joined a company, I've joined Ping, right, here you go, blanket access to all your systems. Good luck. That is no longer acceptable. That's over-provisioned access, right? Organizations, particularly those that are being targeted by nefarious actors, are looking to create just-in-time access. They're looking to create just-in-time access that is time-bound, and that's driven by authorization, real-time authorization logic. And so those kind of things are really important. And then obviously, you know, compliance departments, particularly in this industry, in banking, you know, we need to have oversight of how those identities are managed. We need to have full auditability. We need to have full track record. And so the governance aspect becomes very important. And you know, I've been doing this at Ping for 5 years in financial services, in banking. So I speak to customers in the banking space the world over. And no matter how big or small, they all have an issue with orchestration. Like how do you create and orchestrate those experiences? The only difference is that when you talk to the biggest bank in the world, they've got like 100 identity professionals on their roster, right? Specialists. They can build that stuff out. The more you go down market, the less capability those organizations have. So orchestration becomes important. And I'll come on to in a minute again how AI kind of features into that proposition. But also, you've kind of hit it on the head. You're ahead of me already, right? Trust is also critical when it comes to identity in banking, right? And if you look, all the things that I've listed there, as I called it, above the line, those are kind of table stakes capabilities. This is what you need your identity to do in the banking space, right? But frequently, a lot of banking providers and entities forget all this stuff below the line, right? Forget that it's also about growing revenue, growing stickiness, enhancing employee productivity, enhancing third-party access productivity and access, right? So I think from our experience, the banks that are kind of getting the identity paradigm right are those that are really kind of looking at identity holistically. Actually, I may have said this at the last session when I was here last year, Andrew. There was an article in Forbes, this was probably about 2 years ago, and it made a strong case for there to be a chief identity officer board level, right? Because identity is no longer just within the purview of IT departments. It is a strategic asset. Get it right, you can get ahead. Get it wrong, you could be in a doo-doo, as they say. All right, so now that we kind of got an idea of what identity is in the banking space, let's have a little look at the kind of changing paradigms in IAM modernization. Now, by the way, in this presentation, I've used Gemini. So my image is nowhere near as good as yours, Peter, okay? So there may be some inaccuracies there, but yeah. The key thing to note here is that over the last few years, the banking ecosystem has grown, third-party ecosystem has grown at an exponential rate. And you know this better than I, right? Because you work in the industry. You know, there are a whole bunch of like distribution and go-to-market partners, technology partners, risk compliance partners that create all these dependencies, that create a complex third-party system, ecosystem. And I will actually say this is not longer just about third-party. This is fourth party, fifth party, nth party. I mean, this is like an exponential growth paradigm. And so a lot of the banking customers that we work with are starting to wake up to this, because the reality is that historically, and you know, unless actually let's do a show of hands. Who in this room has a dedicated team to managing third-party access? Okay, well that's encouraging. So we got what, 4, 5, 6? Okay, should be more hands, right? Historically, third-party access has been managed either on the custom identity side or the workforce identity side. And the reality is that that is no longer fit for purpose, right? You need to have a new dedicated team and functionality to actually address that. So the backdrop for this paradigm here is there's more complexity to manage. The other paradigm here is, and again, you've seen this before, circle on the left-hand side is your old traditional bank. And I'm talking pre-open banking, pre-PSD2, you know, where effectively you had your customers interfacing through nth channel with the banking application. And identity was really seen as a kind of an authentication layer, right? As long as they're in, they're good, right? There'll be some friction. As long as we're not getting hit up and getting, you know, compromised, that's perfectly acceptable. Now, as we've gone through the last 8 to 9 years for the open banking revolution, payment services directive revolution, identities become a kind of a trust layer and a fabric that's really critical to managing your third-party API gateways and how those third-party embedded applications and open banking applications are interacting with your banking core, right? So we say the modern bank, but you'll see in a minute that there's a new definition of modern banking as well. So banks have effectively, over the last 5 to 6 years, embraced that. And they said, you know what? We're going to invest much more in identity as a trust layer, right? So it's a big paradigm shift, I would say. And as a result, a lot of banking organizations have decided to look at their internal identity platforms and say, you know what? A lot of these are built in-house. A lot of these are homegrown. There's a lot of technical debt. There's a lot of high degree of total cost of ownership. We've got to replace it. We've got to rip it out. And I'll tell you, I've seen some smaller banks, particularly in the US, who've said, right, 4 months, let's rip it out. Let's rip it out. Let's have a transition plan, and let's do it. And don't get me wrong, I wouldn't say those banks have been unsuccessful, but they've created a lot of risk, they've created a lot of friction, and they've created a lot of anxiety for themselves in managing that process. I can also tell you, and this is not necessarily down to our platform, but the complexity of the ecosystem. We work with some of the biggest banks, I can't name who they are, in the US. It took us 4 years to migrate 120 custom identity, 120 million identity from their self-managed to our SaaS platform. 4 years. And that wasn't because our product is untenable. It's the complexity. It's really difficult. It'd be great to rip it all out and put in the new identity platform that can handle all this. But the reality is that that's seldom possible. So what's the answer? Well, those that have realized that they can't rip and replace the IDP platform said, well, you know what? We're going to build a capability maturity model for modernization here, okay? We are going to start the foundations, right? So we're going to have a strong multi-factor authentication, strong single sign-on. We'll implement a trusted directory. We'll build some orchestration in there. That's our foundation, right? And then throughout that whole process, we'll build out a roadmap, multi-year roadmap, right? Sometimes 3, 5 years. And then we'll build that capability as part of that roadmap. So you can see here in the middle, the next step of that growth would be to introduce fine-grained authorization, replace your passwords, think about threat detection, all those kinds of things. And then eventually, we can get to all the base credentials, and we can think about adaptive continuous trust and all those kinds of things. One problem. the tenure in people who make decisions about this is on average between 2 to 3 years. So how do you reconcile having a 5-year roadmap versus the average tenure of an IAM leader being 2 to 3 years? There's a disconnect there. So typically what would happen is that the new person would come in and say, you know what, let's build a new model. Let's start again. What does that mean? That means the time to value is diminished, right? And again, a lot of banks have invested a lot in these solutions, but actually, they've kind of said, well, where's my value return? Well, your value return needs to be short-circuited. So what does that mean? So what can we do about that? So this is our current modernization paradigm that we're currently in, right? So what banks are actually saying, and this is not just in Europe, but also in America and Asia, particularly ANZ and ASEAN. As we know, in ASEAN, there's a lot of innovation in the banking industry. What we're effectively saying here is you don't have to replace your identity platform. You can use best of breed, what we call universal services, and you can plug them in as you see fit, right? That includes, for example, so here there may be a banking customer that wants to be able to use zero-based knowledge biometrics in their KYC, continuous KYC process. Or they may want to kind of experiment with wallet-based credentials. Or they may want to manage identity across the life cycle to introduce relationship modeling to enable delegated access, right? You can take that, you can plug it in, right? So that's the paradigm, okay? And that's really what we're seeing here as far as identity modernization is concerned. That's effectively what's emerging right now. So not IDP replacement, not multi-year capability programs, but you buy these, you plug these in, use them as you see fit, and then you scale up. So that seems pretty neat, doesn't it? Until it all changes, right? And by the way, I didn't quite know what happened to this image. I mean, there's an outdoor image, a desk. You get a point, right? Agentic AI has come in, and it's disrupted the entire identity modernization paradigm, right? That's exactly what's happening right now. I'm not just saying that because we made our identity for AI capability available today, not because of that, but it's actually happening. And I think the presentations that we heard earlier on today just kind of testament to that. So why is that a big deal then? Well, so far today, we talked about good agents, right? As long as you constrain them, make sure they don't, stray too far, as long as you control them, they're going to be okay. They'll work for you, they'll smile at you, they'll do what you need them to do, right? That's inaccurate. Because actually, as we enter the agentic AI race, we have to remember the nefarious actors are also developing the agents to perform and undertake malicious activities that find the weakest spot in our enterprise defense walls and are able to effectively penetrate and exploit those vulnerabilities. This is why I look back to third-party access, because if you look over the last 2-3 years, it's going to fall over. It's going to be my joke for the afternoon. If you look back over the last 2-3 years, malicious actors, whether they're state-sponsored, whether they're crime syndicates, they're actually targeting third-party access much more commonly. And why is that? Because there's a lot of legacy, because there's a lot of vulnerability, because it's the thinnest door that you can just beat down with your leg, right? So in this paradigm that we're entering now, I'm not scaremongering, it's just the reality. There are going to be good bots and bad bots. So we have to be able to identify, first of all, those bots that are known to us. We then have to have the ability to authenticate them. We then have to put in place the guardrails to authorize their actions. And we then have to be able to govern them at a macro level, full auditability, right? So as you can see, and without surprise, each of these little agents has an identity, right? So we have to have an ecosystem for managing that identity, and that's table stakes right now. I guess the question for us to ask ourselves here is, so far we're kind of looking at this in a very futuristic way. I think in my presentation, that lady kind of coming in with her bravado is one thing. I think in your presentation, Peter, you had some futuristic looking images. The reality is this is happening right now, okay? agents are already available, third-party agents. And actually, I refer to a presentation that our wonderful David Burge delivered at the banking scene in Brussels 2 years ago, where he stood in front of the banking community and he literally shouted at the banking community saying, wake up guys, AI is not here to automate your backend. AI here is to help to improve your customer experiences. If you don't wake up and if you don't do something about it, they'll just use third-party agents, right? And I think this is the very, very important point. Some of these agents are already available in the marketplace. And so we have to really ask ourselves as an industry, how many of our customers are already interacting with those agents? For what purpose, right? Are we prepared in case that agent undertakes nefarious action? Are we prepared in case that agent make a recommendation to say, you know what, your mortgage rate sucks, go with somebody else? I can tell you myself, I recently remortgaged the property, that if I can get a better rate, I don't care about loyalty. I really don't care. I want a better rate. I don't want to get ripped off. We're getting ripped off right now. Sorry, I'm going into my political spiel here. We're getting ripped off on interest. I will go to a provider that gives me a better rate. Simple as that. Do I trust my bank, even if it was to give me an agent, that it will give me a good deal? Maybe a good deal for what the bank offers, but I can get a better rate elsewhere, right? So we have to control that and keep surveillance over those relationships. And the second question we have to ask ourselves is, what's the relationship between those human identities and non-human identities? Like, the important thing here, as I mentioned before about the guardrails, is about this notion of human in loop. I think the gentleman here from SAS talked about human on loop, in loop, right? It's critical, it's critical. But then when you start introducing human in loop controls and workflows, we'll have another challenge. Do we have the resources and the capability to authorize and supervise those decisions? When is it appropriate? When do we need the human in loop supervision and decision or not? Right? So we have to kind of ask ourselves that question. And that has to be a scalable proposition as well. And then finally, for any compliance people in the room, oh, there we go. Set the stage. We have to ask ourselves in a dispute, who's liable? The agent or the human? If an agent carries out an action on your behalf and you authorize it, is the bank going to say, well, you kind of approved it, so it's your fault if you got ripped off, or it's your fault if you got compromised because you fell victim to authorized push payment fraud, right? So those are kind of things that we have to think about that are kind of really, really important.
The question is the regulator going to back us up on that?
Hey, exactly. You know, when I was doing research for this over the last year, I really struggled to find regulators that are up current with this. Like, where are they? Where are they? I know things are changing very rapidly. I know there's a discussion. We should have a conversation about the regulatory landscape here. To what extent are regulators really keeping up with this? Maybe it's not about regulation. Maybe it's about good practice principles. Maybe it's about banking providers making the right call, rather than being prescribed on what they should do or shouldn't do. But anyway, these are all very important questions to consider. And look, I'm not going to go through this table here, but I just wanted to summarize here in a very important point, which is that this new identity paradigm that we're currently entering, that we were in, is complex. We have to think of the implication that the agentic AI transformation, revolution, because it's not evolution, a revolution will have on brand disintermediation. You know, the contact, we talked about this, and I think, again, Peter, you mentioned that in your presentation. The contact between a bank manager and a customer, that's dead. Now the contact between the call center and the consumer is also dying. Soon the relationship between the consumer and the mobile banking app will also die. So where's the relationship with the brand? Right? We could say, wow, it doesn't matter. It's not retail, is it? Who cares? Banking is also about creating stickiness. It's about creating customer loyalty, right? So to what extent can agentic be used to deepen that rather than work against it? The other thing to mention here as well that's really important is that ultimately our decisions in building our products and infrastructure to support personalization in banking is also going to change. You talked again, Peter, you queued me up beautifully for this presentation. the UI. Where's the UI going? Well, if the agent is the UI, what does that mean? Where are we investing our hard-earned euros in the banking space? Because it used to be in product development. It used to be about having the best mobile app. It used to be about having a best experience or best user journey. That's also changing. And we talked about the changing trust anchor as well. So ultimately, again, this goes without saying, customers are not going to be making a decision based on brand loyalty. They're making a decision based on what offer you give them, how much they can trust you, and how effective you are at executing against that vision, right? So it's really, really important, I think, to look at that. And I would just say that over the last 4 months at Ping, before we launched this offering today, we held a number of global workshops with financial service leaders. So in the US, in Europe, in Asia, and also in Australia. And we see this all the time because we, particularly me in marketing, like you, Andrew, I like to get up and talk and get people excited. But at the end of the day, rooms are filling up when it comes to agentic AI. Books are selling. To what extent is the industry ready to embrace that revolution now, right? I was speaking to one of you earlier on today about this, and it's not just about technology, right? You could argue that technology is the easiest part of the entire paradigm. It's about the operating environment, it's about accountability, it's about teams, it's about people, right? How do you create the right conditions for that? And what we found from these kind of global roadshow events is that banks are really struggling to figure that out, right? So we've got the technology, right? There's an understanding of where there is a changing in paradigm, but you need to really design that operational architecture. For want of a better phrase, this is not just a one-man, one-woman show. There needs to be a range of partners involved in that process to help design the organization architecture, the process, reskill the people, and also ensure technology is future-proofed, right? So you don't have to then, make the same investment and rip and replace 2 years later, right? So I think it's really important to undertake this kind of high-level risk opportunity kind of assessment, gap analysis, not just at a technology level. And that is precisely why, again, Hugh would say that, wouldn't he, because he works for identity vendor. Identity is even more of a strategic asset in this era that we're entering right now, right? And it's not just within the purview of one department. It needs to sit at board level. It needs joint accountability. Okay, so I think I've kind of dwelled on that for long enough. We do have more, I'm not sure, are these decks circulated to the participants, Andrew? They're not. Yeah, we'll sort something out. We'll have a chat about that. So we've got some really interesting assets. Actually, the one in the middle, I think it's great because I kind of authored it. Of course. We spent about 5-6 months with Deloitte in the US building that with a cybersecurity practice. And we asked ourselves the question, sorry?
Use any AI?
I've got, hey, in this age, if I didn't, I'd be out of a job, No, but the question I laid to my dear colleagues at Deloitte is, what are the low-hanging fruit use cases in the financial service industry for agentic AI? And in there's some really interesting revelations around how agentic can transform the claims process in insurance, about how agentic can also help to strengthen fraud detection and response in banking, about how it can help to balance portfolio and wealth. I know it's your cup of tea, right? So I just recommend, we'll make that available to you one way or another. I recommend you have a look at it, and there'll be much more. But with that, I would just say that the IAM modernization has now changed yet again, but it's changed in a way that's more profound at any point in time, I think, certainly since I've been in identity for 7+ years. So with that, thank you very much for your attention.